In 2021, we were inspected by Her Majesty's Inspectorate for Constabularies and Fire and Rescue Services. They graded us at good at how we keep people safe and secure, good for how efficient we are, and good for how well we look after our people. We are one of only a few fire and rescue services in England to receive a rating of good in each of the inspection areas. Our full report can be referenced by visiting our website. We are Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service, creating safer communities.
Alex, are you yeah. Okay, morning everybody. Welcome to Nottinghamshire and City of Nottingham Fire and Rescue Authority Finance and Resources Committee on Friday the 20th of January at 10 o'clock. Welcome to colleagues who are here in the room, both members of the committee and officers from the service who are joining us this morning. The eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that I am not Councillor John Clark. John's on other council business, and so I'll be chairing today's meeting and substitute for him. So we'll move into the formal agenda. Item 1 is apologies for absence. Obviously Councillor Clark and myself substituting. Not aware of any others at this stage. Item 2 then is declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest by any members or officers in relation to any items on the agenda? I'm not seeing any indications. Item 3, colleagues, is minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of October for confirmation. I am in your hands because I wasn't obviously present as a non-ordinary member of this committee. Are colleagues happy that they are an accurate record? Anybody want to raise any comments or questions in relation to the minutes?
I wasn't.
Somebody happy to move them? Who was present at the moved by Councillor Eaton, seconded by somebody? Councillor Bailey seconded them. Colleagues happy to agree the minutes? Thank you very much. Item 4 then, our first substantive item on the agenda is the Revenue, Capital and Prudential Monitoring Report to November 2022, which is a report of the Chief Fire Officer, but it's going to be introduced by the Treasurer and Head of Finance, Becky Smithers.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. So this report takes us up to the end of November, monitoring up to the end of November. So it's sort of following on from previously reported to this committee. You'll see from section 2.1, table 1, that the underspend position is now projected to be 220,000. That's quite significantly less from October's meeting, simply because we've uplifted the salaries and pay scales to reflect the 5% pay offer from the employer's side now. Clearly that's not yet agreed and it could still vary from that, but the increase, the 5% increase has been built in to give you a bit more of a realistic outturn position, because we will be reflecting that outturn, but by way of putting the additional sum in a provision anyway, so it would be reflected in the outturn position. Clearly, as I said, that the pay award's not been agreed yet, an increase of up to 6% would be an additional £190,000, which would reduce that forecast underspend to £30,000. So, as you'll know, throughout the year we've been working with a significant number of vacancies across the whole of the workforce, and that's allowed us to absorb that additional pay increase throughout the year. So other than that, on the revenue side, there isn't very much that's changed. Moving on, so if I just move on to capital, we've got a couple of areas where we're asking for a little bit of slippage. Some of it's not a little bit, some of it's a little bit more, but 2.24 identifies a community fire risk management information system, the CFMIS system. There's £150,000 requested to be slipped just for just slight delay in the project. 2.26 cyber security. This relates to that we had a significant increase in the insurance costs for cyber security. And this is to try and we could have had additional assurance to cover us, but we felt that the investment would be better placed by improving our cyber security provision, and that's what this expenditure is. And we've had consultants in at the moment, but this system is not due to be fully implemented into next year. So moving on to 2.37. This is, if you remember, we did approve the placement of the order early for these fire and rescue pumps, but the delay in being able to secure delivery at the moment, and also the build once we've got the chassis is ongoing, as it is in all the automobile industry. So we are expecting this money now to be required in 23-24. So we're requesting a significant amount of slippage here in of £2.6 into next year. And we've tried to reflect, I know this is a common criticism, the level of slippage, but in normal circumstances this would have gone through in this year, and we have tried to reflect the delayed delivery times in the 23-24 capital budget, but it's always quite difficult to preempt what's going on in some of the markets at the moment. Finally, in 2.40, an additional 140,000 slippage is requested for purchase of 5 pool cars. We're expecting them in June, so they are on their way. And then we've also managed to achieve a saving of 138,000 on the purchase of those cars. But again, the delays in delivery have caused us to request the slippage. Prudential monitoring, you'll see from table 4 that we're in line with all the prudential performance indicators that we've set ourselves, so there is nothing to report on that. And that, I think, is it. So the 2 recommendations are to note the report and to reprove the capital slippage that I've just run through with you. So if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Becky. Any questions on the report? Councillor Heaton?
Thank you, Anna. I've just got a question, not about the slippages, but the potential. So, if, for example, if we don't have pool cars at the moment, what are we using at the moment, and does that have an impact on the current revenue budget?
Terry?
Yeah. Okay, so we have pool cars at the moment. So there's a natural replacement of those cars. Obviously, they'll stay with us a bit longer. As part of the light vehicle strategy, we are looking to keep more pool cars anyway. So these are flexi-duty officer cars, blue light fitted, and sadly they've been 18 months delivery time for the hybrid car that we've chosen. But we're going to keep those existing pool cars, and it won't affect us on operations.
And just generally across the slippages, are there any impacts on the revenue budgets?
The impacts of more will be on the minimum revenue provision, the budget that we set for paying the debt cost, because obviously we're not having to purchase vehicles, so the minimum revenue provision will come in a year later. But we do anticipate when we calculate those budgets an element of slippage, because we just don't know where it's going to be, because we know with some of the bigger projects there will be a little bit of slippage at the end of the year. But yeah, so it more impacts on next year's budgets, revenue budgets, than this year's, and we've built that in the 23-24 programme.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Councillor Upton?
Well, yes, just focusing on page 19, transport. Again, this item 2.37. Due to the current lead time on chassis, 12 to 15 months. I understand the issues about getting delivery of these, and there's quite large sums of money involved. But is it still like potentially a 15-month delay? That takes us beyond the next financial year, doesn't it? Puts us into 24-25, potentially.
Yeah, and we've recognised that when you get you'll see it in the next report, the vehicle capital budget has been, we've tried to reflect when we're anticipating receiving those vehicles, given that the delays that we're receiving at the moment. So we've tried to reflect that, knowing it'll be typical if the market corrected itself a little bit, and we'll be asking you if we can bring some of the funding forwards, but you never know.
It just seems a long time, isn't it? 12 to 15 months. Can't they give you a more firm delivery window, for instance? Can't they say, well, it won't be this year? Or it's a bit vague, isn't it, frankly?
Well, go on, Terry.
Yeah. So 17 new pumps. It was a very long and drawn-out procurement process to make sure we got the best value for money, and we have through competition. That only concluded 2 or 3 months ago. We're now speaking with the supplier. We've now got guaranteed as they can do delivery dates, and the first 3 of those 17 arrived for us in June next year. So next year. Sorry, June this year. June this year. So they're arriving. They're arriving in June this year. 3. Yeah. So we can't afford to buy 17 all in one go. So we've spread it out over four capital years. So the first 3 will be delivered. They will then go into manufacture, because we just get the chassis. Then they've got to make them into a fire engine. Yeah. And those first 3 will be in service in March 24. So within this capital year. So we're hoping to pay for all of those 3, all the production and all the delivery. And then there's an ongoing programme all the way through to the 17.
Thank you.
For the next 4 years.
Well, that's more reassuring, isn't it? You've got 3 coming in June.
And clearly, and clearly when we have delivery times in March, that always makes it a higher risk that it might need slipping a little bit, because a week can make a difference between one financial year and the next.
Yeah,
so. And we have been proactive in trying to, we have brought several requests forward to order some of the vehicles earlier than would normally, because normally we'd approve the capital programme before we would order anything, so we wouldn't be able to place the order till April. But we have brought a couple of requests forward through this committee earlier in the year to try and overcome this long delivery time, since they're vehicles that we know, they're key operational vehicles. It's not that we're not going to need them, or we couldn't manage without them.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Upton. Thank you, Becky. Terry, any other comments or questions? Recommendations are on page 23 then in the pack, that we note the contents of this report, and that we approve the slippage to the capital programme as detailed in table 5 below, which I'm not going to go through. It's listed there, and Becky's given us quite considerable detail, so I'll move the recommendations. Somebody have to second them. They're seconded by Councillor Fielding. All those in favour of the recommendations? Anybody against? No, they're unanimously agreed. Item 5 then is budget proposals for 2023-24 to 2026-27 and options for council tax for the year ahead, 2023-24. Report for the Chief Fire Officer. Becky will be introducing this report as our Head of Finance and Treasurer.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. So this report brings to you the budget information to enable you to recommend back to Fire Authority the level of council tax that you would recommend to increase or stay the same for 23-24. It's been quite difficult putting figures together for this financial budget process. We've had difficulty because we haven't had the pay award in any known form. Normally we would know what this year's pay award. Yes, I've got 2 years of pay award uncertainty, and obviously the funding. We've now got a little bit more information than we had when we considered the medium-term financial strategy, because the provisional local government finance settlement was announced on the 19th of December. So this report reflects that information. We still have further information that we're awaiting from the precepting authorities regarding council tax base, and the level of the collection levels, and also business rates, which is where more of the volatility is. It's fairly easy to predict council tax, but business rates, with the movement of different properties following COVID, closure of some businesses in the cities, in the towns, and then opening up of more sort of the big warehouses. It's been quite difficult to predict, so I'm waiting for some further information from the billing authorities, which will be providing by the end of January. So those are the outstanding bits of information, and clearly the pay award as well. So that's the basis for this report. So if I start off with capital, once again, we have almost £4 million capital programme proposed for 23-24. The slippage that we've just discussed and recommended will add to that amount, so it will be in excess of £5 million now when it comes through to February's Fire Authority. It involves mostly around the transport and the vehicles, and with ICT programme as well. But the biggest expenditure area is vehicles. Funded mostly from borrowing, because there are no grants available for us to fund the capital from, and obviously with revenue and reserves at the level, the difficulties that we're having with those, there's very little other funding available. So the ICT programme does include a significant amount of expenditure, but that's in 24-25 for the replacement mobilising system. Those costs are likely to increase because we've been made aware that potentially Leicestershire will not be joining in the procurement exercise now, so that will have a financial impact on us. So those costs will likely to go up by, I would say, at least £1 million, because we need splitting between the two authorities rather than three. But when I have more information on that, I'll bring it back to this committee. So moving on to revenue, as discussed, I've assumed the pay award of, it's a bit that I wanted to bring out. Here we go, I've missed the page out, I've turned 2 pages out at once, do apologise. So I brought the medium-term financial strategy to Fire Authority in December, and since then the movement in the budget has been quite significant. So I've tried to put it together in a table for you at the top of page 32. So in table 1, you'll see that from the funding settlement, we've gained quite significantly. We've got nearly £300,000 in revenue support grant that was increased by CPI, whereas we'd assumed a 5% increase in the medium-term financial strategy. Services grant I thought was going to be maintained, but in order to increase the revenue support grant by inflation, they'd taken some of the funding away from the services grant. So we had a small loss on that. And then the Section 31 grant for business rates, the NNDR business rates, we've got an increase of 270,000 there, and that's because we did know that the business rates would increase by inflation because that's set down in legislation. But they did implement the revaluation of business rate properties we expected that to be delayed. So all business rates properties were revalued, and it's been delayed. I think it was supposed to be implemented in 22-23, and it got delayed to 23-24, and I was expecting another delay. But it's been implemented, and the value of our properties has gone up quite significantly, and because of that, the inflation increase on that has resulted in a £270,000 additional funding in Section 31 grant, which is why I'm thinking we should be receiving additional collection funding from the business rates as well, that I mentioned earlier. So council tax increase, we'd assumed in medium-term financial strategy that we would only be permitted to increase by 2.95%. They've provided us with the flexibility of a £5 increase, which would raise an extra 833,000 compared to the 2.95%. Clearly that is dependent on decisions made by members at Fire Authority. Unfortunately, it was another one-year settlement, but the finance policy statement has given us some assurance that the main areas of grant funding will at least increase with inflation next year. So I've built those assumptions into the budget. So we've got, I'm not going to run through the economic climate, I'm sure you're all aware of that. Inflation is coming down slightly, so that's one good area, but obviously the high inflation levels still impact quite significantly. The biggest impact for us is the impact it has on the pay awards. We've got the efficiency programme that's underway. We've already identified £250,000 worth of savings within this year, and further reports will be presented to Fire Authority alongside the budget report in February to enable you to make an informed decision when you've got both a financial position and more further information on the consultation exercise on Futures 25. So with regards to the pay award, we've assumed a 5% pay award for this year and a 4% for next year. So 5% is what's been offered by the employer side at the moment. But just this week or last week, I think London have offered a slightly higher rate of 6% and 5% to employees in London Fire Brigade, which could have an impact on the offer that we pay. It's still under negotiation. Obviously, you know, it's not down to this authority. Pay negotiations are run by the National Joint Council, so it's a national negotiation, and we await to see what happens from that when the ballot closes for the strike action on 31st, I think it is, of January. So I had already identified that this was a risk that could happen, so I have got the cost for those extra 1% built in. I've identified those figures later in the report, so you can we can have a look at the impact of that. So let's go through that. So moving on to reserves on page 37. So you'll see from the reserves that the sheet that we in the monitoring report, we've got earmarked reserves in the region of 4.5 million, and we've got total reserves of 9.8 million, the general fund being the difference of 5.3 million. So within the earmarked reserves, we've got 1.126 million provided to give some budget pressure support, and 0.9 million to help us deliver any changes that we'd want to deliver through the efficiency strategy to create future year savings. So the 1.126 is your sort of envelope of budget support that you've got to use to try and balance the budget requirement out over the coming years. It's not something that you would recommend using all in 1 year, but it's to try and help us move to a position in a balanced budget, which we clearly have the responsibility to set. So going on to the outlook on 2.56 on page 38. I've put together 3 proposals to give you a set of options for you to consider. A council tax freeze, 2.95% increase in council tax, and a £5 increase in council tax. So you can see what the impact it would have on budgets. Now, the figures in the tables that I'm going to run through have assumed the 5% and 4% pay award. An additional 1% would present an additional cost of 550,000 on top of these if that were to be approved. So, table 2 on page 39 is that it looks at figures with a nil council tax, would show that for 23-24 we'd have a deficit in excess of £2 million, and that would increase over the years to being over £5.5 million by 26-27. Clearly the reserves available that we've got wouldn't be sufficient to cover the 23-24 deficit, and it would require a significant amount of reduction in funding, a reduction in expenditure savings to be made. Table 3, page 40, looks at 2.95%, which would bring down the deficit figure to £1.362, £1,362,000. Obviously, we're assuming that 1% pay award, that would take that up to 1.9 million. Is still in excess of the reserves that we've got available to support the budget for next year, and therefore would still require quite a significant amount of savings to be made. A £5 increase in council tax drops the deficit down to £529,000, which is clearly a lot more manageable, and you'll see future years it raises a little bit, but it's a lot more manageable than lower increases in the council tax setting. Obviously a higher pay award would take that up to 1.1 million, so it's still quite a significant amount of money. So bringing all of that together in your budget options, if you look at table 5, that shows what the impact on council tax would be. The first column is the current year council tax, and which is what a nil council tax increase would be, and then a 2.95% council tax on £5 available in the last column. And finally, moving on to page 42, I've just put those 3 options available in one table. So the bottom line shows you shortfall with the 3 different options that you've got. So I would suggest that at Fire Authority you have a blend of options available. You've got your reserves that we've set aside 1.1 million. We need savings, and we need to consider what the level of council tax that you need to set. So once you've set your council tax, that's left with in-year savings and the reserves that we've set aside available to support the budget. I would ideally like to propose that they would be there to support us in the following year too, given that the shortfall is expected for more than just 1 year. The £5 offer, I would say, is available for 23-24. Is unlikely that it will be extended into 24-25. The Home Office are asking for some commitments to making efficiencies in return for the £5 offer. I think with the efficiency strategy that we've got and that we're presenting to you previously in September and also in February, will provide the assurance that they need, that this authority has done a lot of efficiency work, and I feel that it strongly delivers the requirement for those efficiencies through to the Home Office. But it is unlikely, I would stress, that the £5 offer will be extended into 24-25 and beyond. So if it's not taken now, we'll be back to, I would say, the 3% limit for next next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. And I think the first thing just to say, given the volatility and the lack of predictability about the situation and the fact we've got another 1 year settlement, it's just what an outstanding job you're doing on behalf of the authority, Becky, in both providing a report that is clear for members to understand, but also navigating what is quite a difficult, whatever your view of all of these issues, is quite a difficult landscape. And I think you've done not only a remarkable job for us in recent years, but particularly in what is a very, very difficult year. So on behalf of the authority, Becky, thank you for the work that you're doing. And I know you found it at times frustrating, stressful, and giving you time over the Christmas break. So we're very, very grateful for the support that you've provided. The other two things I'd just say are, I made this point at the Fire Authority. One, it's usually frustrating that we should have to rely on 60% of our budget being funded by council tax. Next year, if we accept the £5, the best part of 29 million to fund a budget of 49 million, and that is frustrating because the burden therefore falls on, which is a point people have made cross-party and authority before, the burden therefore falls on residents, the taxpayer, families who are already obviously struggling. The second point, though, I will make is we've obviously lobbied very, very hard cross-party for both a greater flexibility in terms of council tax because of the acute pressures, particularly this year, facing the service, many of which we're aware of and have been elucidated by Becky today. And I think it would be a remiss of us and a mistake not to accept that flexibility, given that we've argued very, very strongly for it. We clearly also made some gains in the funding settlement in December as well from the lobbying that there was. I can't remember how many times I've spoken to ministers and written letters, and I know other people have as well, MPs have, and I know colleagues around the table have been pressing the point. I know Craig's been making the point very strongly through the NFCC, and I know, Becky, you have in the networks you're involved in. So my suggestion, given the scenario we've set out, and I think we're left with very little option, is that given that we've argued for the £5, we propose to, obviously it's a matter for the full authority, but we propose as Finance Committee to the full authority that we preset the £5. Relatively speaking, actually, the service is still quite low if you look at on the bill in terms of the police, other areas. We're still actually quite a low proportion of the bill of the council tax bill itself. And the other point I'll make is, I think Becky's read of the situation is correct, and I've seen the correspondence from the Home Office, but with the greatest respect to them, next year we might not have the same Home Secretary and we might not have the same policy approach. And I don't just mean it changing government party politically. It might be different colleagues in the room, and I think the job on us, incumbent on us, is if the situation doesn't abate, we need to lobby hard again cross-party for a flexibility, whether it's £5 or whatever it is, next year, as well as obviously an improvement in the funding settlement. But I think your cup of hold card reality, Becky, is a really helpful reminder to us about the fact that there's likely to be ongoing pressure. So I will open a debate, but I'm going to move from the chair that we recommend to full authority that we preset the £5, and I'll open it up for conversation and discussion or questions people may have on the report, and then I'll ask if somebody's happy to second the recommendation, then we can have a vote thereafter. So I've got Councillor Fielding and then Councillor Bailey.
I certainly believe that it would be right to go for the £5 option. I don't think any other would be detrimental to how we've lobbied and gone for things. And we need to leave the Fire Authority in the best financial position possible, and I think going for the £5 would do that. It doesn't mean that there isn't efficiencies and other things that we're going to have to do to balance the books. And I don't for 1 minute think it's going to be taking the £5 is an easy option, because it isn't going to be. But I think it is, in this current climate, the best option available.
Thank you, Councillor Fielding. Councillor Bailey.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with the £5 proposal, but I think we recognise the fact that we're not making a decision today. It's a recommendation for the full Fire Authority, and I think recognising the uncertainties that you've raised, as well as the ongoing efficiency savings. I don't believe we have those full details in this report. I think it would make sense for now to delay any recommendation and actually decide at the full fire authority. That way we'll have a much fuller picture, as well as we'll be able to have a full frank debate about it in that meeting. That's my view on it anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Just on that point, I mean, we're not, as you said earlier, here making a decision, but we are discharged with making a recommendation, and that was a request by the full authority that we made a recommendation, and that was a cross-party vote on that. So I will just remind colleagues of that point. And of course, just on the second point you made, there will be a full and frank debate and a vote in all authority, notwithstanding whatever recommendation we make here anyway. Just in response to the point about not enough information, I mean, as far as I'm aware, the only 2 points of information we're rating for is a confirmation on tax base and a confirmation on the NNDR business rates pool and where that's going to end up. And actually, there's a stab at that in the figures that there are there. I'll bring in Councillor Battlemutt, and I think Councillor Upton wants to contribute to the debate as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in favour of the recommendation, and I'm in favour of us making a recommendation, but I want to caveat that with a couple of things. Firstly, I don't think anybody around the table from whatever political party takes lightly the idea of putting council tax up. You know, we're all councillors in our own authorities. We have that debate ourselves, and we'll be having, you know, that at our full council in March in Nottingham, when, you know, acutely aware of the cost of living issues for residents. But I think we're in that sort of situation where, you know, there is no other best case scenario, is there? You know, what was clear over the last few months is there is fairly widespread, I believe, opposition to service cuts. You know, we haven't seen the full results of the consultation, but I'd be gobsmacked if people were saying, yeah, let's get rid of fire engines. So if any increase in the fire authority budget allows us to look again at some of those issues around service efficiencies, then I think that is a trade-off you have to take. You know, there is no other pot of money to dip into. Government have put a little bit more in, from what we can see, not a great deal. Government clearly should be funding fire authorities much higher than they are, and they should be anticipating wage settlements, etc. But they're not. However, they've given this flexibility around council tax, and I think we would be cutting the nose off to spite our face if we didn't take it. I would like, for the bigger picture, for the full authority to kind of see how that fits in with the consultation, with any changes that we might want to make as a result of that, and whether the increase in the budget gives us flexibility to make some changes. But overall, I don't think we've got any option but to take the £5 offer and to build that into the budgets.
Thank you, Councillor Battlemutt. The Chief just wants to come in, and then I will bring in Councillor Upton.
Yeah, just give reassurance to Councillor Battlemutt, which is that if you go back to February's planning assumptions last year that Becky provided to the authority, for those members that were here, it was 2.2 million. That was revised later in the year to 3.3 million. Even with £5 and with all the effort cross-party through officers, national and everything else, you're still operating at a projected deficit. I think that, you know, nobody kind of sees that. Certainly the feedback I've had about council tax is that your council tax to the fire authority is not in isolation to the council taxpayer. It is county council tax, it's police precept, it's fire precept. So £5 for yourselves, what does that materialise into a council band D property owner is different from £5, and that is a lot of feedback I'm getting. What the £5 does give you, it gives you an answer to the Fire Minister is why did you lobby and then not take it? And the letter that Becky has provided a draft response on my behalf to at the moment to look through to the Fire Minister is, what are you doing to not take the £5 to make efficiencies and reprioritising budgets in all other areas? So what it does give us in terms of consultation, you'll be aware, members, that we've previously some weeks ago sent you a date of the 27th of this month for members' seminar following Policy and Strategy Committee, at which there'll be an overview of the consultation about what it said. And I'm sure I'd agree with Councillor Battlemutt, you know, there won't be any surprises in there. And as we said, there was anxiety of authority going out to consultation when we didn't know the picture. The reality is, if we hadn't have lobbied and we hadn't have done things, we might still be facing a £3.3 million deficit if you hadn't have done all that work, and we hadn't been out to consultation, we wouldn't have a coherent plan to present to you. What it does give me as your chief officer, if you do take the £5, it doesn't build in terms of pay, because we still don't know where the pay settlement's going to be. There is an award from London Fire Brigade, and there will be, as I understand, through the LGA, which the chair will be privy to, and a chief and chairs event to know where pay discussion is going. And I hope that discussion, because we're not privy to that really, that will increase the cost to the authority, so the numbers changing in here, but Becky has given some indicative figures here about what the additional cost is going to be. It gives me, as your chief officer, more time in terms of making those cost cuts, those savings, those efficiencies. It gives us more time to make sure that we look at it in a very prudent way. And there are some recommendations in your Futures 25 strategy as well that we'll be bringing back as an update to Fire Authority about where we actually are. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief. Councillor Upton, and then we'll bring you in, Becky.
Mine's very brief because the Chief and yourself, Chairman, have answered my question really. I was going to say that the clarification from my perspective was the two big unknowns are what will the pay settlement finally be, and what about the business rates, because those are two big items for me to make up my mind, because they do impact on any of the options, do they not?
Yes, so obviously the pay award, we don't know what that's going to be yet, but business rates, the bit that I don't know about yet, I would say a 10% swing would be 300,000, so it's not going to be a huge amount in terms of the whole budget.
No.
The bit that we're not cited on yet, so even if it was a 10% increase, it would be relatively small.
Yeah.
And in terms of the consultation, I did manage to find out that one of the questions was about the support for a one-off £5 increase in council tax, and the results for that was that 13% would oppose it, 54% would strongly agree, and 80% would support. So it did show public support in the consultation exercise that we've undertaken.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Upton. I think you make a good point, Roger, that of course the pay award issue may not be resolved until way beyond full authority.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it's highly unlikely it will be.
Neither will the pensions issue.
Exactly. Right. Just the other point I think we need to be cognizant of here, there's not only the correspondence from the Minister, of course the 5.2% uplift in core spending power, which is referenced in the official government figures for our service this year from the funding settlement, is virtually entirely predicated on us taking the maximum council tax amount. And actually, if you don't believe my words on that, just look at the table that Becky referenced on page 32. The RSG increase is almost entirely offset by the loss in services grant. There's a little bit of movement in terms of the NNDR section 31 grant, and then actually the council tax increase is what nets you the virtual vast majority of the 5.2% increase in core spending power. So we also just need to be a little bit careful here as authority members. We've lobbied and pressed our MPs cross-party who have stood up in the House of Commons and argued for that uplift in core spending power. If we're then not seen to be taking advantage of the primary tool that gives us that uplift in spending power, we're going to be found wanting in terms of the arguments we've made cross-party. I'm not seeing any other indications in terms of questions or comments, so I have moved the recommendation that of the three options that we take the third option as set out in the report, which is to recommend to the full authority the £5 increase. And it is just a recommendation at this stage, it's not a decision. Is somebody happy to second that recommendation? Seconded, yeah. Okay, I'm going to take a vote by indication. All those in favour of that recommendation? All those against the recommendation? Any abstentions?
Would you like that, please?
Happy to record. I mean, effectively, you probably do need to record its recommendation, so I'm happy for it to be recorded.
No.
Okay, so the recommendation for Fire Authority is an increase of £5 in council tax precept. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Becky. Item 6 then is exclusion of the public. So to consider excluding the public from the meeting during consideration of the remaining items, in accordance with section 100A for the Local Government Act 1972, on the basis that, having regard to all the circumstances, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information by virtue of paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act. So I'll move the recommendation. Somebody happy to second it and agree?
Agreed.
It's agreed. Thank you very much, colleague.